Welcome to the Fraser Coast Property Brief, the podcast where property, development and business leaders share what's really happening across the Fraser Coast. Each episode brings you insights into local projects, market trends and the people helping shape the future of our region. Welcome to another episode of Fraser Coast Property Brief, where we discuss property development and business that shape the Fraser Coast. Today, I'm joined by Maggie Brennan. So welcome back, Maggie, to the Fraser Coast Property Brief.
Thank you, Glenn. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So I want to delve into a few topics around the commercial property management. But first, anybody didn't see the first podcast, give us a bit of an overview of what you do and what the Hervey Bay Commercial Property Management does.
Hervey Bay Commercial Property Management, or we refer to it as HBCPM, we specialise only in commercial property, the management of it and leasing. So we don't do residential. We find it's a specialist role. We manage approximately 140 odd properties in Hervey Bay, in industrial, office, retail and some medical.
All right. So how is it different to residential property management? What's the big difference between the two?
I think the major difference is the lease and how landlords will then collect the money. So I'm generalizing here, but in residential, you collect the rent. Then when your rates are due, it's up to the landlord to make sure that they're covering those payments. In commercial, dependent on the lease, so again, if it's a net lease, your tenant is responsible for the payment of the rent and the outgoings. So dependent on the type of property, for example, retail is a bit different to other commercial leases, but things like council rates or body corporate levies, repairs and maintenance, that's all covered by the tenant. So effectively what lands in the pocket of the landlord, that's their money. All the other bills have been covered by the tenant.
All right. So let's see what makes a good property management and what is involved. So the main responsibilities involve professionally managing commercial property, but tell us about the rent collection and the arrears and rent reviews, lease options, things like that. So what does a normal day or month involve for a commercial property manager?
It's funny you say that because a comment we often hear is, isn't being a property manager just collecting rent? But it's more than that. So you're right. We start our week on Monday morning looking at arrears. So, receiving what's been received. If there's any one that's overdue, they get a statement because there's timing differences. Also, we take a look at, at the beginning of the month, what leases are coming up for renewal? Are there options that they're taking up? Are people vacating? If they're vacating, have they done what they need to do? So again, in some commercial leases, there is a make good clause, which means there are certain things that need to be done before you can leave, return keys and collect your bond back. So that's another one. And in our standard day, we might have some leasing. So if we have any vacant properties, we meet with prospective tenants, take them through, see if they're the right fit, and there's a vetting process as part of that. But yes, quite often as well, it all depends on what's sitting in our inbox and what phone calls we've received.
Right. It's obviously maintenance, things like that. So which responsibilities create the greatest financial risk, especially for the property? What's the big things that are high risk?
High risk is, I would say, the tenant that you have.
Yeah.
So a bad tenant can mean many things. It could mean damage. It could mean if they're not paying their rent, is there financial implications there that we need to be aware of? Usually there's a pattern that we would start to see, but I think it usually rests with the tenant.
Right. So mainly financial. So you obviously keep some sort of lease diary or something like that for rent reviews and options and things like that. So how do you run that sort of process on a weekly basis?
We're probably around 3 to 4 months ahead. So usually in the lease, it would document when an option needs to be taken up. And from there, you're right, it's all implemented and input into our property management software. So at the beginning of the month, we would do a report to show what's coming up. So we've got plenty of time to have these conversations.
Yeah.
A common thing is, are you happy with the space? Should they find somewhere else where they've got more room to expand, or are they actually downsizing? Or is this space perfect for them? If it is, there's steps involved up to that time. So they need to re-sign their options. There might be rental increases on the anniversary of their lease commencement date. 3 ways of doing that. There's CPI, there's a fixed increase, there's a market review. So there's many moving steps and mechanisms to get to that point where, okay, your lease is up.
Yeah. So with a lease expiry, most of the leases are either 1, 3 or 5 years. When should the tenant and landlord start planning for that lease expiry? It's not like a house you want to move out 2 weeks before your lease is up. Sometimes to move a whole business and all the back end stuff is major, or if a landlord needs to find a new tenant, what's a good time frame to start talking about the expiry dates of the lease?
In between 3 to 6 months, in our opinion. So if we use an example of a 1-year lease, quite often we've seen a lot of mum and dad businesses sign their first commercial lease. They're unsure whether this space will suit. Will they outgrow it very quickly? So once they start the lease and they start getting settled in, they'll have a fair indication. And we're in constant communication with them because, they might need their aircon serviced. There's other maintenance triggers. So we do our routines. We'll be visiting them quite frequently in that period. So we'll get a fairly good indication by, say, month 6, if this space is working for them. If it's not, again, they'll be making plans.
Yeah.
Can we assist them find another space? Would they like to look at expanding into next door? We've had that happen to us this year where very quickly in the first year, they'd just simply outgrown the space. But instead of moving, they thought, right, we're quite happy where we are. Next door's up for lease. Can we take that on too? So that's some of the mechanisms that come into place before their original lease is up for expiry. We can then align the 2 leases to start and finish at the same time. That makes it a lot easier to track.
All right. So let's talk about some of the big mistakes. Let's go with the landlords first. So what's the most common mistakes you see landlords make with commercial leases or commercial property in general?
Not prioritizing maintenance. So, an exercise that you in fact taught me, it's good to get in the car and have a look around, not necessarily at the properties that we manage, but someone else's in general. What would we say about the appearance? Because quite often that's something that someone could say about our properties. So is it looking tired? Are the signs looking rusty? Are there exposed pipes and wires in the gardens? Should it need mulching? Having a great presentation of a complex, I think, is really important. And sometimes, when landlords get busy, if they've been self-managing, maybe they haven't had someone to give them this advice.
Yeah.
If they've had a property manager involved previously, again, as a property manager, we follow our landlord's instructions. Yes, we can advise them and make recommendations, but ultimately that rests with the landlord on what their plans are for the property.
I've always seen over the years there's a difference between a good landlord and an average landlord. But they've got to think with the end buyer, if the place looks tired, the customer doesn't like going in there. And then if the customer's not going in to you buy product off the tenant, then the tenant can't afford to pay the rent. So eventually the landlord's mistake is costing them the tenant because it's not helping their business survive. So how costly is it mistakes for the landlord when they miss rent reviews or option periods? Because there's a real legal requirement about option periods and what you can and can't do. So is it a big mistake, and is it especially if landlords managing themselves?
Yes. So again, I'm generalizing here, but a few scenarios. So if you've missed the option period, has that lease expired? If it's expired, perhaps you've missed the window of opportunity on when you can implement the rent reviews. So, say for example, 1st of July, well, we're now towards the end of July, that's been missed. What if this was another 6 months down the track? You can't then just go and backdate.
Yeah.
Oh, whoops, I've missed increasing the rent. So I think that's a risk for the landlord.
Yeah. It's also a risk for the tenant because if there's an option in place in the lease, they've got an automatic right to take on another 3 years, say. But if they don't call their option period, say within that 3 months before the lease, they lose all their rights. And if the landlord wants to kick them out and find another tenant, whatever, they can. So,
Well, that's right, because if there is effectively no lease in place, if they haven't taken up their option and extended, say, for example, if it was a 1-by-1, if they haven't taken up that next part of their lease, well, effectively it's reverted to a month to month. So they'd only need 30 days notice and they'd have to leave.
yeah. You know, is the tenant that offers the highest rent always the best tenant?
No, no. Most landlords would like to see a nice long-term tenant stay, even if the rent has been brought down, perhaps as an incentive. Having a happy tenant that always pays their rent on time would be much more beneficial than chasing the optimal rent, but then after 6 months, their business hasn't done very well. So it's back to being vacant.
So if the landlord doesn't have a property manager, what's some of the key signs or warning signs suggest they're not getting managed properly? What's the things they should look out for besides getting a good property manager like yourself?
Thank you. Things like looking at their lease. If they're unsure when their tenant's lease is expiring, or when's the option period, or is it a gross lease or a net lease? What are the obligations that your tenant is responsible for? Have they serviced their air cons recently? Are they up to date with their fire? If they don't know answers to these questions, and I understand life can get busy, well, that's where we as a property manager would play a part, because when was the last time they've gone and inspected the tenancy? You might have had nice neutral colours. Is it bright blue now? Again, they would have needed landlord approval, but just showing you some things that could happen. Things like the rent as well. Has that been increased when it was meant to? Because ultimately, this is an investment. So if you're not increasing the rent in line with the market and watching how that plays out, well, you're not acting in your own best interest.
I'm a big advocate for lawyer-based leases rather than just the simple REIQ leases. So how important is the lease document? Because especially when it comes to make good clauses and its options and things like that, having a good lease for your investment property, is it a crucial thing?
It is. It depends on the landlord's long-term strategy of their business as well. So say, for example, they may have a plan that they'd like to sell. If they've got really weak short-term leases in place, well, that will not be helping their sale process. But if they have strong long-term tenants, they might have 5-by-5 leases. That will look much better if they were selling to an investor. But perhaps if it's somebody like me who's just entered the market and has another 30, 40 years ahead of them, maybe their strategy then is maximizing cash flow. So if that's important, well, maybe that's all part of the negotiation process. But having a good lawyer giving you advice also helps you when you structure your lease, because, standard things in an REIQ lease, like the make good clauses, well, that's not necessarily in there.
Yeah.
Are they required to repaint the walls and redo the carpet furnishings? That's something a lawyer lease would cover.
All right. Let's talk about tenant mistakes. What's the biggest mistake a tenant makes when leasing a commercial property?
Not understanding their lease fully. So I can understand if it's your first time signing a commercial lease, maybe you're not aware of what the difference is between paying your rent and what outgoings are. Most of the time when we say to our tenants, here's our outgoings for the year, that's a budget. If there's been an increase in rates or an increase in insurance, or if there's been some repairs and maintenance, and you're responsible for paying the outgoings per your lease, well, come the end of the financial year when we do a reconciliation, you will be required to top up. If that was a shortfall, of course, if there was an overpayment, that would be credited, but not budgeting for these expenses, which is where we try and assist in this process. We, again, depending on the landlord's instruction, prefer to invoice rent and outgoings every month. Then it's much kinder to the tenant, and they can clearly budget what they're expected to pay, rather than just, okay, we've paid our rent this month, we've paid our rent the next month. Oh, but the month after we have body corporate and council rates due, sometimes an extra $7,000 you just don't have. So completely understanding your obligations in that lease.
Yep.
Again, it's not just the payment of the rent, but are you aware that you're responsible for certain compliance matters? Aircons to be serviced. If it's a food tenancy, they need to get their range hoods done and grease trap servicing. And there's many, many clauses in that lease that would cover off on your obligations. I get it can be overwhelming, but that's where your property manager should be able to assist you, as well as your village, whether that is your accountant and your lawyer.
All right. So that's the big difference between residential and commercial. So explain, because residential is basically just a gross lease. Whatever you pay, that's what you pay. And the landlord has to pay rates and everything. So explain the difference in commercial between a net lease and a gross lease.
A net lease. So when I first entered into commercial property as well, I'm assuming it's my accounting background. You'd hear net and gross and you think, okay, it has something to do with GST. Not at all. A net lease means you're responsible for the rent. So the figure that you see on your lease, that's just purely rent. But looking at the outgoing section, it might say plus 100% of outgoings. So the net lease is your rent plus outs plus GST. In a gross lease, if you come to that, if that's all been packaged for you, whatever you pay in your gross lease, that's it. So say, for example, if you're paying $1,000 a month, that would cover your rent and any expenses for the property.
But you still pay GST on top of even a gross lease.
That's
because as a commercial, it's input credit. So you get it back at the end of the month because you're registered for GST.
When we quote figures, we always like to quote exclusive of GST. It's a given.
Because it's very different. Residential, you can't claim it back. Commercial, you can because of business expense.
Yes.
All right. So you're talking about make good obligations and why it matters at the end of the lease. Why is, and tenants, because some of the wording's grey, like fair wear and tear and things like that. So what typically is a tenant up for when the lease is up? Say after 3 years, what do they have to do to the building before they leave?
Generally speaking, in a lot of the leases that we see, repainting of the walls is one, as well as professional cleaning of the carpet. So you can't just have it cleaned and think that's okay, that's enough. That's 2 points there. A third, fire compliance. So if you've got fire lights and smoke alarms, extinguishers, they need to be tested and tagged and proof shown. The aircon, that's important. Was that serviced within the last 3 months? And if so, well, we need to see a copy. Because if you're leaving a premises, again, I'd assume the landlord would want to minimize the vacancy. By having it presentable, it's ready for somebody else to go in.
So what happens if the tenants, done some extras in there, built some offices inside a industrial shed or something like that, or a mezzanine floor? So what happens with all that extra work they've done? Do they have to remove it? Can they claim it? What's the go with that?
That should be covered in the lease. Most commonly, you would be expected to return the tenancy back to its original form. So yes, if you had extended the mezz floor and put sheeting down and made offices, well, if your make good clause says it needs to be returned back, yes, you do have to pull it apart, make sure it's all back. If the floors were sealed, make sure it's back sealed like it was when you moved in.
Yeah. And there's usually a bond in place, 1 to 3 months, something like that, to make sure that these works are done correctly, or you can step in as property manager and get it done?
Yes.
Yeah.
So quite often we've seen if there's been an adjustment in rent, perhaps the tenancy has ended due to financial reasons. Maybe they don't have that to be able to cover all of those expenses. Yes, the landlord, and they might come to an agreement with the tenant and say, right, we're going to use your bond for this, 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 and this. That needs to be agreed upon for us to go ahead and do the works.
Right. So let's talk about Hervey Bay specifically. Commercial property, which is retail, medical, professional offices, industrial trade. So it's a broad range of properties. So what's hot and what's moving in Hervey Bay at the moment?
When I came and spoke with you last time, we were talking about industrial, and I think that still stands today.
Yeah.
Industrial is really in demand in Hervey Bay at the moment. We attended the FCPIA, the Fraser Coast Property Industry Association's AGM last week, and there was a workshop there where the Director of Infrastructure Services came and did a talk, and it really piqued my interest when I saw the stats on Drury Lane. Back in 2021, when they did their transport and they looked at the numbers coming in there daily, 17,000 a day That's a lot.
Yeah.
And they're projecting that that could be up to 22,000 or more. We think it'll be more than
It'll
that.
be a lot more when the growth corridor comes in at Dundarren.
Not only that, we've got 6 complexes out there at the moment. You'll see our billboards and our signage out there, but that's new in the last 12 months.
I suppose our industrial is different to what people around Australia think is industrial. Most people think a big factory building things and making things. Even Maryboroughu's very much an industrial town with train manufacturing and Naya and all the rest of it. Hervey Bay is very different. We're a service-based type industry. So what does our industrial look like?
I agree. It's very much trade and services based.
Yeah.
Again, using that as an example, a lot of mum and dad businesses, whether they're tradies, builders, and they all complement one another. I feel that's where they're all flocking to Drury Lane. Such a big growth corridor, high visibility. It's medium impact, so they can do a lot of things there. No time restrictions, no noise restrictions. And the like seem to attract the like.
Yeah. All right. And I see the airport, it's about to get a massive upgrade.
Yes.
A lot of industrial going on out there. Is that another area that's going to, explode again shortly because of
Yes.
the growth in the traffic around aviation?
Especially if you've got logistic businesses. You're right, with all the new flights that are coming to Hervey Bay, the upgrade of that will be great for those surrounding businesses. And there's a fair bit of land, as you see, if you go for a drive out there, that's getting developed, all these new big tilt panel buildings. A lot to happen in the next 12 months in that space.
What about medical? Medical constitutes about 21% of our employment in the area, and that includes allied health and NDIS and that. So what's happening in the medical office space at the moment? Have we got enough? Is there stuff getting developed or?
That's a very moving space. So, for example, we had a vacancy in a medical centre and that was snapped up within weeks because, again, if there was the facilities around them, depending how close it was to the hospital, if there was clinics and specialists nearby, you want to be in that area. Medical, it's booming, it's huge, it's very busy.
All right. So anything else happening in the property market at the moment? Is it, is there new stuff coming on, or is there a change in trends or?
There are a lot of people out there with big ideas, and I think they've got the mentality, well, let's give it a crack. And they've done their due diligence and they've had a look at how much it costs and they're still prepared to do the fit out. I think in the next 12 months, you'll see some great new businesses coming to Hervey Bay, not only in the retail space or the trade and services based, plus medical. If there's more direct flights coming in here, our population is increasing. Their services are also more in need. So watch Hervey Bay in the next 12 months. There's a lot of growth happening.
All right. I might wrap it up in a minute. So give me a couple of practical examples, without identifying particular owner or tenants or anything like that, where proactive property management actually prevented problems from happening.
A big example is to do with maintenance. So when we were engaged by the landlord, there was a lot that needed to happen with the complex. A lot of easy things like the gardens, pressure washing, freshening up. But we also identified there were some leaks in the roof. So by getting on top of them early, having the gutters cleaned more regularly rather than just letting them build up and, having debris in there just creates, for example, rust and other issues. We're able to prevent the roof needing immediate repair and replacement. And that's a huge cost for the landlord and quite disruptive for the businesses as well. So that's probably a big one, getting on top of maintenance. And then you've got happy tenants. Their precinct looks great. Their shops are presenting nicely. As you mentioned before, it attracts more people for their businesses. So if it helps them pay their rent, happy tenant and a happy landlord. So that was a great win there.
All right. What about communication? How important is communication both ways, landlord and tenant? Because been in the industry for a very long time, and that's always the key that causes problems, the lack of communication. So how do you do it better or different to everybody else?
I like to think we form great relationships with not only our landlords, but our tenants. So picking up the phone, most of our tenants or landlords, if they were to call us, we would help them, whether it's myself or the team that we have. Yes, if you've got a leak, well, we'll get someone out there to come and have a look. Or if you're not sure about something, or when is my lease coming up? Or what does this mean? We'd be happy to help them explain it. Same with our landlords. We like to give them drone shots or photos, or, if a new business has gone next door, we like to keep them updated. And it's nice to, have a chat and see what's been happening since the last time you were talking. So I think the difference for HBCPM, we're the human element. We're happy to help. And if we don't know, we'll find out.
All right. I'm going to close with one last question since we're talking about the human element.
Mhm.
What's with your funny Facebooks every Friday? You are starting to get a reputation around town of doing stunts every Friday and putting something on Facebook. What's behind that?
Well, again, it's the human element. I think it's important to have a good laugh at yourself. And sometimes we feature our tenants if it's appropriate. Sometimes it might be something that's happening in the world or globally. So just the human element.
Where do you come up with these ideas? Shadow boxing, driving a Santa suit on a motorbike, all these things. You need to check out Maggie's Hervey Bay Commercial Facebook page. You want to have a laugh every Friday morning.
We'll look forward to the new Friday funnies.
You got one coming this week?
They're all in here. Yes. All ready to go.
All right. We might wrap it up there. Thank you, Maggie, for joining me again.
Thanks.
And talk to Maggie if you want to talk about commercial property management, Hervey Bay. I'll see you again next time. Thanks.